In class, we had discussed how Rome had changed from a republican form of government, which was elective, to an imperial form of government, the empire, following the murder of Julius Caesar. Under the empire, Rome was ruled by emperors who inherited their power or took it by force and kept it for the rest of their lives. Now, as we also talked about in class, following the death of Julius Caesar, there was a 14-year civil war, and Augustus was Caesar's nephew and had won that civil war, and his first test was to try to bring the recently conquered regions of Hispania, Spain, and Gallia, or Gaul, modern-day France, into line under submission. And Augustus personally led troops into those regions to subjugate them to Roman rule. These final defeats of Hispania and Gallia in many ways ushered in a period that the Romans referred to as the Pax Romana, what they believed to be a period of peace and prosperity. We'll see, of course, that wars continue, but they still continue to call this period the Peace of Rome. After defeating Hispania and Gallia, Augustus returns to Rome in 13 BC, and on his return to Rome, the Senate commissioned an altar dedicated to the goddess of peace, Pax, that would usher in this new period of the Peace of Rome. And this is what we're going to focus on with this particular 10-minute art fix. The actual altar to the goddess is inside this shell. It's open to the sky above, certainly as an homage to Apollo, and it's reached by a series of steps because it sat on a slight hill. So here we see the actual altar itself, and what we're going to look at are the decorations on the outside of it. These decorations around the entry to the altar itself focus on the foundation of Rome. It's very badly damaged on the left side, the original northern side of the altar, and in fact it's damaged on the outside along the edge as well. Whereas the right side, the south side, is much more better preserved. And what we see here to the left of the entryway is the story of Romulus and Remus, which is told in Virgil's Aeneid. If you remember from our classroom discussions, Romulus and Remus were descendants of Aeneas who had survived the Trojan War, and they were abandoned as children and nursed by a wolf, which is very conjectural here, but obviously based on the Capitoline wolf. And you can see that only a few fragments remain here. This shows the scene where they're discovered by a shepherd, who we see here, while Mars, the god of war, looks on from the left-hand side. Again, remember, this is all retold during Augustus's time in the Aeneid written by Virgil, who was Augustus's court poet, and in fact the Aeneid was commissioned by Augustus to commemorate the foundation of Rome. The story of Aeneas and the foundation of Rome continues on the right-hand side of the entryway, where we see Aeneas here about to make a sacrifice. There's a temple in the background. He has his family with him, and this huge hog that you see in the foreground is about to be sacrificed to the goddess Juno in heaven. You might remember her as Herod when she was a Greek goddess. And Aeneas is shown here making an offering to commemorate and thank the gods for his survival in the Trojan War. It's important to remember, and we'll come back to this, is that Aeneas was looked upon by Augustus as being one of his ancestors, that Augustus' own line descended from Aeneas and from Romulus and Remus. So these are important elements to bring into our understanding of the ars pacis. Now, the entry is on one side, but you can walk around the altar and, in fact, exit on the opposite side. And as you can see, since it sat on a slight hill, there are no stairs down. You exit on ground level out the opposite side. And whereas one side of the Areopagus depicted the foundations of Rome, the opposite side illustrate the prosperity of Rome that follows Augustus's victories, the peace that he's brought to Rome and the prosperity that comes with it. So again, on the left here, we see, again, the better preserved half. This idea of Rome's prosperity is told with personifications again. The figure in the center, which you see here, is Mother Earth. In Roman mythology, she is Tellus, the goddess of the earth. And we had seen her once before. She actually decorated the front of that breastplate that's worn by the Augustus Prima Porta. And you can see in both images she shows seated, with signs of bounty around her. There are grapes on her lap, the ox and the sheep beneath her feet. And in both of them she has two children that she's nursing as a sign of, again, prosperity. This idea of prosperity in the Areopagus image is continued by the two figures on the sides, where we see a woman riding a goose here, and a woman sitting on a sea monster over here. There's its head, and the oceans beneath her feet. Not only does the earth provide for us because of the peace of Rome, but so too do the skies and the oceans. On the opposite side, again, very, very badly damaged, we see a personification of Rome herself. So again, told through allegorical figures, and again, only fragments remain of descriptions. But here we see her, the personification of Rome, seated on unused weapons of war, shields, breastplates, and the like, because now Rome is at peace. And so that's the standard symbolism of this. It really shows the history of Rome leading from its foundation to the peace that Augustus has brought to it. Finally, on either side, between the front and the back of the Areopagus, is a procession. You can see it here in varying levels of relief. This is a contemporary ritual that was held at the time this was made to celebrate the peace. And we have some details of it here. It shows senators and priests and members of the imperial family marching in procession toward the doorway of the Areopagus in the same way that you would approach it yourself. Notice the children that appear. For Augustus, now emperor, going to pass the power to his kids, the idea of having a family that included multiple generations is, of course, quite important. Here's a continued version. So the fellow that we see here also reappears here. This is the same child as that. That's the same figure as this. And you can see that there are more children here. And again, a typical Roman interest in vibrancy, liveliness, variation. And you'll also notice that the relief is very high relief for the figures that are closest to us, and lower relief the further back we get, to give a sense of depth. Very different, I think, in many ways from what we saw with Greek reliefs. Now, there's some debate over the identity of the different figures, and particularly the cowled figure here. A lot of people want to think that he's Augustus, and that's his wife Livia behind him, and of course his heir below. But the problem with this is that he's unusually old. That normally when Augustus appears in images, he appears in that perpetually youthful state, the age that he was when he assumed power. That said, he's clothed almost exactly the same as Aeneas is around the corner. And in fact, a very similar pose, one arm bent and holding the toga that's draped over his head, the other arm down. In this case, Aeneas is holding this part of the offering, whereas this figure is holding a staff of leadership. Since Augustus traced his lineage to Aeneas, it makes sense that he should be in the same pose. And this well could be a more realistic image of Augustus, and again echoing the pose of his predecessor, his ancestor, Aeneas. Well, that's the end of this screencast, and we'll look at other imperial monuments in the upcoming arc fixes.